This video podcast is brought to you by McCarter Online.
It's real interesting for me because I was born after 1965, so I was born in the 70s, and the thing that really sparked this whole idea of this unique, interesting friendship and all the challenges with shaping your own image is, I grew up kind of post-civil rights, post-nationalist. I grew up in the 70s. My parents were both in the civil rights, black nationalist struggle. My father was in SNCC. They were like a real progressive student movement in the early 60s. They did a lot of collaborations with Reverend Martin Luther King, and they were really instrumental in a lot of these marches in the early 60s, like in Alabama and Mississippi, these now infamous, marches, So he was one of the cats in SNCC. He was a foot soldier, he was no one you would ever know his name. He was very politically active. Also in New York, my mom was very active. She was like one of the people that organized the daycare workers in New York City into a union, and she was really active in the community. So I grew up kind of in not the pinnacle of that, but in the 70s when it was kind of starting to fade, but it was still very rousing, I was on the picket line, Nixon, you liar, set your ass on fire, trying to stay up, march all night, 4 years old, I'm tired, keep marching for the struggle, And anyway, so they sent me to this school. It was a Pan-African black nationalist school. So it's interesting, I grew up, before I learned about George Washington or Abe Lincoln, I was learning about Frederick Douglass and Nat Turner, and then I had to learn about the other ones. So it's kind of interesting, I had a reverse thing. Anyway, so for me, Muhammad Ali growing up in this environment was he was like Superman. He was Superman to us. And Stepin Fetchit, I'll never forget, in this black nationalist school, they showed us this documentary, and it was called Black History, Lost, Stolen, or Strayed. And the narrator was Bill Cosby. And at this time, Bill Cosby had like an afro and like a leather jacket. He looked like a Black Panther. It's not like Bill Cosby like with the sweaters. There wasn't no sweaters, It was like, the turtlenecks and he was like, he was like the hard Bill Cosby or whatever, I don't know. But anyway, in this movie, they showed a clip of Stepin Fetchit, and they were like, he was a traitor to our race, and it was all this kind of stuff. And I remember the teachers being like, don't ever be like him. You know what I mean? Don't be like him. He's a traitor. He's an Uncle Tom. He's, he has set our culture back, So growing up, I knew about these two people, Stepin Fetchit and Muhammad Ali, but they just seemed to be polar opposites to me. And just a few years ago, maybe about 5 years ago, I was in a bookstore, and I came across this book of Muhammad Ali, this poster book, and in it was a picture of Muhammad Ali and Stepin Fetchit together. And I was like, what? It's like if everything your parents and your community has told you just all of a sudden just goes out the window. You go, what are they doing together in the picture? You know what I mean? And Stepin Fetchit, usually in the movies, Stepin Fetchit's like, oh yeah, like it was that lazy character. But this time Stepin Fetchit was like, like he looked serious. I'm like, that's Stepin Fetchit, And so it set me on this quest to really find out the truth. And I'm telling you, when you come to the play, I mean, it's all based on truth. It's just a fantastical story of the truth that really happened in the information that was passed between these two men. And so that's a little bit about it. And I kind of feel like, my parents coming up in the 60s and stuff like that, it wasn't the time to go back and look at these characters like Stepin Fetchit and Hattie McDaniel with a nuanced eye. That was the time to be like, we're not going for these racist, images. And, unfortunately, some of the cats who were in that got thrown out. But now, me being a post-civil rights child, I have the privilege to sit here and go, well, who was Stepin Fetchit? What are the complexities? You understand what I mean? Because it was, my parents was more like, we can't have that. We can't have that. And so we're just throwing that out. And so there was a reason for that. That was their reaction, their response. And it needs to be that strong. And so now I think, it's good for my generation to come back and say, well, what's the real story? Let's go further. I couldn't have done this story 30 years ago. There's no way no one would go and see anything about Stepin, anything. It couldn't be done. It was just too sensitive, But now we can go and look at these stories in the past with a more critical eye, I think.
This podcast has been brought to you by McCarter Theater in Princeton, New Jersey. For tickets, call 609-258-ARTS or visit www.mccarter.org.